A brotherhood of monks became the most powerful bankers on earth, then vanished overnight. The Knights Templar built a secret financial empire that shaped our modern world, only to be crushed by a king desperate for their gold. By the end of this story, you will understand the true price of absolute power and the conspiracy that shattered it. How did holy warriors amass a fortune that terrified kings? And what hidden truth led to their sudden, brutal end on a day so infamous we still fear its date? What does the fate of these legendary knights tell you about the nature of trust? Those dusty roads to Jerusalem were a crucible of faith and fear. Christian pilgrims, having journeyed for months across continents, faced their final and most deadly trial just miles from their goal. Bandits lurked in the rocky passes, preying on the weary and the devout. It was into this chaos that a small group of 9 knights, led by the French nobleman Hugues de Payens, stepped forward. Their initial goal was astonishingly simple, a mission of pure service. They would become the guardians of the road, the shield for the defenseless traveler. They took up their swords not for conquest but for charity, vowing to protect any pilgrim from the violence that threatened to overwhelm their sacred journey. This humble beginning, rooted in a direct response to human suffering, was the seed from which a colossal empire would eventually grow. Their dedication did not go unnoticed. At the Council of Troyes in the year 1129, the Church officially recognized this new brotherhood, formally establishing the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. This momentous step was heavily influenced by one of the most powerful religious voices of the age, Bernard of Clairvaux. He saw in these knights a perfect fusion of the monastic and the martial, a new kind of warrior for a new kind of war. Bernard himself drafted their Latin rule, the strict code of conduct that would govern their lives. This document transformed them from a well-meaning militia into a formal religious order. Each knight swore vows of personal poverty, chastity, and absolute obedience. They lived as monks, praying at set hours, eating in silence, and owning nothing individually. Yet they fought as soldiers, their white mantles soon emblazoned with the stark red cross, becoming a symbol of hope and order in a lawless land. This dual identity was their greatest strength and one day would become the source of immense suspicion. How could an organization sworn to poverty become unimaginably wealthy? The answer lies in the trust they built from that very first selfless mission. That papal decree in 1139 was not merely an endorsement, it was a political earthquake. Pope Innocent II's proclamation, known as Omne Datum Optimum, which translates to every perfect gift, effectively severed the Templars from the world around them. They were no longer subject to the whims of local bishops or the laws of kings. Imagine a modern corporation that could ignore every national government, build its own private churches, and collect taxes directly from the populace with no one to audit its books. That was the new reality for the Knights Templar. They became a sovereign entity, a network of fortresses and commanderies that answered only to the Pope in Rome, who was often too far away and too embroiled in other conflicts to provide any real oversight. This was the legal key that unlocked their future. With the power to collect tithes and taxes for themselves, their financial engine began to roar to life. Their unprecedented autonomy, this status as a state within a state, became the solid bedrock upon which they would construct an empire of both faith and finance. But such immense privilege, operating entirely outside the normal hierarchies of power, could not help but cast a long shadow of envy and suspicion across the courts of Europe. This legal fortress, however, needed an equally formidable military arm to protect its growing treasures. That white mantle with its blood-red cross was more than a uniform, it was a statement of terrifying efficiency. In an era where armies were often temporary gatherings of feudal lords and their poorly trained followers, the Templar was a full-time, lifelong professional. He trained relentlessly, fought with precision, and lived under a rule of iron discipline. Their battlefield doctrine rejected the chaotic, glory-seeking charges that defined much of medieval warfare. Instead, they moved and fought as a single, cohesive unit. A Templar knight was forbidden from breaking ranks, from pursuing personal glory, or even from retreating unless the enemy force outnumbered them by at least 3-1. This was not an army of heroes, it was a machine of faith and steel. To secure the lands they protected, they became master builders, erecting some of the most formidable castles the world had ever seen. Their fortress at Atlet, perched on the coast of the Holy Land, was a marvel of military engineering, a sprawling stone complex that served as both an impregnable stronghold and a nerve center for their regional operations. Yet even the most disciplined warriors could meet with disaster. The searing heat of the Battle of Hattin in 1187 saw a Crusader army, including a vast contingent of Templars, surrounded and crushed. It was a catastrophic defeat that led to the fall of Jerusalem itself. But even in this loss, their legend only grew, their unwavering stand becoming a testament to their commitment. For nearly 2 centuries, they were the standing army of the Crusader states, the one constant professional force in a war defined by its chaos. This legendary military power, however, came with an immense and constant price tag. Feeding, arming, and maintaining a permanent international fighting force required a river of gold, a financial demand that would push the order to invent an economic system far ahead of its time. That vow of personal poverty created an organization of astonishing wealth. The Templars themselves owned nothing, but their order became the richest entity in the Christian world, and it all started with a simple, brilliant solution to a traveler's dilemma. Imagine you are a 12th century pilgrim from France. You have saved for years for your journey to Jerusalem. To survive the trip and pay for food, shelter, and safe passage, you need a small fortune in coin. Carrying that heavy, clinking purse through bandit-infested lands is an open invitation to be robbed and left for dead. The Templars saw this problem and engineered a system that would change the world. A pilgrim could walk into any Templar commandery in London or Paris and deposit all their money. In return, they received a single piece of parchment, a coded letter of credit. This document was worthless to any thief, but upon reaching a Templar fortress in Acre or Jerusalem, the pilgrim could present that letter and receive the full value of their deposit in the local currency. It was safe, it was efficient, and it was the birth of international banking. The Templars did not just protect pilgrims from physical harm, they secured their economic lives. This genius system of moving wealth without moving physical coin quickly caught the attention of powers far greater than the average traveler. Kings and popes, who also needed to fund their wars and projects across vast distances, began using the Templars as their personal treasurers. The order's preceptories from England to the Middle East evolved into a network of formidable, stone-walled banks. They managed the royal treasury of France, they provided loans to monarchs, and they orchestrated the complex financial logistics of entire crusades. A king in Paris could deposit funds, and his army in the Holy Land could withdraw them, a logistical miracle in a fractured medieval world. This financial innovation transformed the knights from elite soldiers into utterly indispensable economic players. Their assets grew to include vast tracts of land, entire fleets of ships, and a liquidity that rivaled nations. but this very success planted the seeds of their destruction. The same kings who relied on their financial wizardry also grew deeply indebted to them, and a king in debt is a king who sees not a partner but a threat. This sprawling organization operated with an efficiency that would rival any modern global enterprise. At the very top sat the Grand Master, a commander-in-chief elected for life, whose authority was absolute. From his headquarters in Jerusalem and later the island of Cyprus after the loss of the Holy Land, his directives flowed out across a meticulously structured hierarchy. The order was divided into provinces, each governed by a regional master who reported directly to the Grand Master. There was a Master of England based in London, a Master of France in Paris, and others overseeing territories from Aragon to Apulia. This was not a loose collection of allied chapters. It was a single, unified command with a chain of discipline as rigid as its military code. A message from the Grand Master could travel from the eastern Mediterranean to the British Isles with a speed that no king or emperor could hope to match, because the Templars owned the roads, the ships, and the secure way stations along the entire route. Their physical footprint was staggering. Beyond the iconic castles, the Order's wealth was rooted in the land itself. They owned thousands of properties across Europe, a vast portfolio of productive assets that included farms, grain mills, sprawling vineyards, and even entire villages. These weren't just symbols of status, they were revenue-generating engines. The wheat from their fields, the wine from their presses, and the wool from their sheep were sold in local markets, creating a constant, diversified stream of income that fed their central treasury. This network allowed them to move more than just messages. It was the physical backbone of their revolutionary banking system. A letter of credit issued in London was honored in Rome because the same unbreachable organization controlled the flow of information and value at both ends. This logistical and financial supremacy, however, created a dangerous paradox. Their centralized wealth, so efficiently managed and so easily identified, began to look less like a treasury and more like a single, massive vault, a prize waiting for a king bold and ruthless enough to try and seize it. And one king, deep in debt and burning with resentment, was watching that vault very, very closely. King Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, ruled a kingdom on the brink of financial ruin. His good looks belied a desperate and ruthless nature. Years of continuous warfare against England and Flanders had drained the royal treasury completely. He had already tried every desperate measure a medieval king could conceive. He had repeatedly debased the French currency, sparking inflation and public outrage. He had ordered the expulsion of all Jewish people from France, seizing their property and assets in a brutal act of state-sanctioned theft. Yet these drastic actions were not enough. His debts were simply too vast, and his largest creditor was the very organization that also served as his royal banker, the Knights Templar. The French crown's entire treasury was physically housed within the fortified walls of the Paris Temple, a stark symbol of his dependence. The Templars were not just his bankers, they were his financial masters. This created an unbearable tension for a monarch who believed his power was absolute. Wiping out his colossal debt and seizing the Templar fortune in one single, brutal stroke presented a terrifyingly simple solution. But a king could not simply arrest an entire religious order for the crime of being his creditor. He needed a justification that would shock all of Christendom, a pretext so scandalous that it would legitimize utter annihilation. Philip the Fair would not just borrow their money, he would borrow the darkest fears of the age to destroy them. The king's plan required not just force, but a story so vile it would shatter the Templars' sacred reputation. On Friday, October 13, 1307, that story was unleashed with brutal precision. As dawn broke across France, royal officers moved simultaneously, storming Templar commanderies and preceptories. They arrested hundreds of knights in their sleep, including the order's leader, the elderly Grand Master Jacques de Molay, taken from the Paris temple itself. The element of surprise was absolute. The charges read aloud to the captured brothers were a carefully engineered masterpiece of propaganda designed to horrify the medieval conscience. Officials accused the knights of heresy, of secretly denying Christ and spitting on the cross during their initiation rites. They alleged the brothers worshipped a mysterious, demonic head known as Baphomet and engaged in enforced homosexual acts. These were not just accusations of financial crime, they were allegations of deep, hidden sacrilege, transforming the revered white-mantled warriors into a secret cult of Satanists and traitors operating within the very heart of Christendom. The shock value was immense and intentional. In a deeply religious and superstitious age, these claims provided King Philip the public justification he needed for an otherwise unthinkable act of aggression against a protected religious order. The date of this treachery, Friday the 13th, would be seared into cultural memory as a permanent symbol of misfortune. But to make these fabricated charges stick, the king needed confessions, and for that he had a terrifying and officially sanctioned tool. The Inquisition provided the perfect legal framework for the king's ruthless ambition. This institution, designed to root out heresy, was weaponized by Philip the Fair. Under its rules, a defendant was presumed guilty until proven innocent, denied the right to know their accusers, and offered no legal counsel. The entire process was engineered not to find truth, but to extract a confession by any means necessary. Torture was not a last resort, it was a standard, expected procedure. To break the proud knights, their interrogators employed brutal, systematic methods. One of the most common was the strappado, where a prisoner's hands were tied behind their back and they were hoisted into the air by a rope, their entire body weight wrenching their shoulders from their sockets. They were then dropped suddenly, the violent jolt causing excruciating damage. Another favored tool was the rack, a wooden frame with rollers at each end. The victim was tied down while the rollers were turned, slowly and methodically stretching their body until joints dislocated and tendons tore. Faced with such unending, calculated agony, the human spirit can only endure so much. One by one, the knights broke. Grand Master Jacques de Molay himself, an old man who had dedicated his life to the order, eventually confessed to the fabricated charges. So did many other high-ranking officials. Their wills shattered, they admitted to spitting on the cross and engaging in obscene rituals, saying whatever their tormentors demanded just to make the pain stop. These coerced statements, meticulously recorded by royal notaries, were then presented to the public as undeniable proof of the Templars' depravity. It was a brilliant, cynical deception. The king had manufactured his evidence, using the screams of broken men to create a smokescreen of religious outrage that perfectly hid his true motive, the staggering debt he owed them. With these confessions in hand, Philip now possessed the leverage he needed to bring immense pressure to bear on the one man who could formally dissolve the order, the Pope. Pope Clement V was a man trapped. He was the spiritual leader of all Christendom, yet he was also a Frenchman, chronically ill, and acutely aware that King Philip's power reached right into the papal court itself. The king's arrest of the Templars placed Clement in an agonizing dilemma. These knights were his own men, answerable only to the papacy, and Philip had trampled that sacred authority without even consulting him. The Pope's initial reaction was one of genuine outrage, a feeble protest against this brazen overreach. But Philip the Fair was not a man to be swayed by protest. He turned the screws of pressure relentlessly, flooding the public with the horrific, if entirely fabricated, confessions he had extracted. The scandal was now international, and the Pope appeared to be dithering, unable to control a crisis involving his own most formidable order. Clement's hand was forced. In November 1307, he issued a decree known by its Latin title, Pastorales Praemunentiae. This papal bull commanded every Christian ruler across Europe to follow King Philip's lead, to arrest every Templar within their borders and confiscate all their property. With this single document, the Pope effectively legitimized the king's illegal coup. It was a stunning capitulation. The spiritual authority of the papacy was now being used to sanction the destruction of its own most powerful military arm. This moment revealed a profound and irreversible shift in the medieval world. The age of unquestioned papal supremacy was ending, and the age of the powerful, centralized nation-state was dawning. Clement V had become a pawn, his weakness ensuring that the fate of the Templars would now be decided not in a fair trial, but in a protracted legal and political spectacle orchestrated entirely by their greatest enemy. Even coerced confessions cannot forever silence a righteous cause. As the legal proceedings dragged on, a remarkable and courageous defense began to organize. In 1310, before the Papal Commission, a stunning reversal took place. Hundreds of Templar brothers, once broken by the king's torturers, found their voices and their courage. They stood before the church authorities and publicly recounted their confessions. One after another, they testified that their previous admissions of heresy and sacrilege were outright lies, words spoken only to end the unbearable agony of the rack and the strappado. They swore that the Order of the Temple had always been faithful to Christ and the Church, that their rituals were pure and their mission holy. This was a collective act of immense bravery, a desperate attempt to reclaim their honor from the jaws of a cynical and brutal machine. King Philip's response to this defiance was swift, public, and utterly terrifying. He could not allow this narrative of innocence to spread. In a field just outside the city walls of Paris, he ordered 54 of these defiant Templars, men who had bravely retracted their forced confessions, to be tied to stakes and burned alive. Their crime in the eyes of the Inquisition was not the original fabricated heresy, but the new charge of being relapsed heretics. By taking back their false confessions, they had fallen back into error, a technicality that carried the automatic penalty of death by fire. This was not justice, it was a calculated act of state terror. The message to every other imprisoned knight was brutally clear. Speak the truth and you will die in agony. Remain silent in your lie and you might just live. The smoldering ashes of those 54 men effectively extinguished the Order's organized defense. The legal process, already a sham, now descended fully into political theater. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, and the entire spectacle existed only to provide a thin veneer of papal and legal approval for what was, in reality, a grand theft orchestrated by a bankrupt king. The courage of those knights highlighted the profound corruption of the entire affair, but their sacrifice could not stop the inevitable final act from unfolding. The official end came not with a bang of justice, but with a whisper of political expediency. At the Council of Vienna in 1312, Pope Clement V faced a king who had literally brought an army to his doorstep. Surrounded by the military might of Philip the Fair, the ailing pontiff issued the papal bull known as Vox in Excelso, the voice from on high. With this decree, he suppressed the order of the Knights Templar. But listen closely to the language, for it reveals everything. The bull did not declare the Templars guilty of the horrific charges of heresy and idol worship. After years of torture and coerced confessions, there was no formal condemnation. Instead, Clement dissolved the order for the good of the Church. citing the immense scandal that now surrounded it. This was a masterclass in legal evasion. The Pope gave the king what he wanted, the destruction of the order, without ever having to pass a definitive judgment on the truth of the accusations. It was a face-saving measure that saved no one's face, a decision that sacrificed an entire brotherhood to appease a tyrant and quell a controversy. The order's immense wealth, its castles, lands, and treasures, were officially transferred by the Church to their longtime rivals, the Knights Hospitaller. Yet this was often a transfer on parchment only. In reality, King Philip and other monarchs across Europe had already moved in, seizing vast portions of the Templar estate for their own royal coffers. The French crown, in particular, claimed a fortune to settle its debts, ensuring the Templars' financial empire was cannibalized by the very powers that had feared it. The structure was dismantled, the brothers were scattered to other orders or left to rot in prison, and the name Templar was officially erased. But for the man who had led them, Grand Master Jacques de Molay, history had one final, searing injustice left to deliver. 7 years of imprisonment had not broken the spirit of Jacques de Molay. On a March afternoon in 1314, the elderly Grand Master and his trusted companion, Geoffroy de Charny, were led from their cells and onto a wooden platform erected before the great cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. They were frail and worn, but they stood tall as 3 cardinals, acting on the Pope's authority, prepared to deliver their final sentence. The judgment was perpetual imprisonment, a life of silent confinement in a cold, dark cell. It was meant to be the final, quiet extinguishing of their story, but then something extraordinary happened. Jacques de Molay found his voice. In a clear, strong tone that carried across the hushed square, he renounced the confession that had been tortured from him. He declared that the Order of the Temple was innocent, a holy and Catholic institution, and that he and his brother were guilty only of betraying their honor under the duress of pain. Geoffroy de Charny immediately stood with his master, echoing his defiant recantation. This was no longer a legal defense, it was a moral thunderclap. The crowd, which had expected a subdued finale, was electrified. News of this public rebellion raced through the city streets straight to the palace of King Philip the Fair. The king's reaction was instantaneous and furious. The carefully constructed facade of a legal process was shattered. There would be no appeal, no further consultation with the distant Pope. Philip simply issued a command. That very evening, as the sun set, the 2 old men were taken to a small, barren island on the Seine River known as the Isle aux Juifs. A pyre was hastily constructed. Tied to the stake, Jacques de Molay faced his end with a calm that unnerved his executioners. As the flames began to lick at his feet, his voice rose one last time above the crackling fire. According to legend that spread like wildfire itself, he did not scream in agony but issued a solemn summons. He called Pope Clement V and King Philip IV to appear with him before the judgment throne of God within a single year. The prophecy, born in smoke and righteous fury, took on a life of its own. Pope Clement V, the ailing pontiff who had acquiesced to the king's will, died of a sudden and severe illness just 1 month later. Then, before the year was out, King Philip the Fair, in the prime of his life, died following a hunting accident. The timing was so precise, so eerily fitting, that the people of Europe saw not coincidence but divine retribution. The tragic execution was instantly transformed into a powerful myth. Jacques de Molay was no longer a disgraced heretic in the public mind. He was a martyred hero, and his final curse became an indelible part of the Templar legend, a story of betrayed trust that would echo through the centuries. With the order officially dissolved, its brothers were cast adrift. Some Templars found a new home within the ranks of the Knights Hospitaller, the very rivals who were now, at least on paper, the legal inheritors of their legacy. Others were permitted to retire, granted a small pension for their years of service. Yet this promise of a peaceful end was often an empty one, as the same bankrupt crowns that had seized their wealth frequently failed to pay the meager annuities they had pledged. For many more, the only future was the cold, damp silence of a prison cell, their lives ending not in battle but in forgotten confinement. The human cost of the suppression was a story of quiet desperation, of men who had pledged their lives to a cause only to see it branded a lie and discarded. But the true frenzy was not over the men, it was over their money. The scramble for the Templar fortune was a spectacle of raw greed. While papal decrees formally gifted the entire Templar estate to the Hospitallers, this was a legal fiction that collapsed upon contact with reality. King Philip of France moved with brutal efficiency, his officers emptying the legendary vaults of the Paris Temple, seizing chests of coin and stacks of precious bonds to settle his enormous debts. In England, King Edward II, after initial hesitation, followed suit, commandeering Templar lands and properties for the royal treasury. Local lords and bishops joined the frenzy, grabbing whatever assets they could lay their hands on. What was presented as a holy judgment had revealed itself as history's most brazen bankruptcy filing, a coordinated raid by kings who had decided it was easier to destroy their banker than to repay their loans. This chaotic dispersal left a void far greater than just a missing army. The most sophisticated financial network in the Western world had been violently dismantled overnight. Who would kings borrow from now? Who would protect the wealth of pilgrims and merchants moving across continents? The sudden absence of the Templars' stabilizing force created an economic tremor that rippled through Europe, leaving behind a landscape scarred by suspicion and haunted by one enduring question. Where had all the treasure truly gone? The smoldering pyre of Jacques de Molay did not extinguish the legend of the Templars, it ignited it. In the startling void left by their disappearance, a new kind of treasure was born, not of gold but of pure speculation. Since the king's men never found a single vast hoard of coin, the public imagination rushed in to fill the emptiness. Whispers began of a secret fleet of Templar galleys that slipped away from their great port of La Rochelle in the dead of night, their holds brimming with the order's accumulated wealth and, more tantalizingly, its most sacred secrets. Perhaps they carried the Holy Grail itself, the very cup of Christ, or the fabled Ark of the Covenant. These were not just stories of lost money, they were narratives of salvation, suggesting that the night's most powerful relics had escaped the corruption of kings and popes. The human mind, faced with an incomplete and brutal history, will always craft a more satisfying ending. It is far more compelling to believe a treasure was hidden than to accept it was simply stolen and spent. So where does myth end and history begin? It is entirely plausible that a few local Templar commanders, receiving fragmented warnings of the impending arrests, managed to spirit away some chests of coin or important documents. They were, after all, masters of logistics and secrecy, but the romantic idea of one massive, unified treasure, a king's ransom waiting in a hidden vault, is almost certainly a fiction. Their real, tangible treasure was their sprawling network of productive assets, the farms, the mills, the vineyards that generated their income, and that treasure, for the most part, was not hidden. It was meticulously catalogued and systematically seized by royal officials, its value absorbed into the crowns they had served. The enduring power of the lost treasure myth reveals something profound about us. We are captivated by the idea that some essence of the Templars, their power or their purity, escaped the grasp of their persecutors. This longing for a hidden truth, for a legacy that could not be crushed by royal decree, is the very engine that has kept their story alive for centuries, transforming a disbanded military order into an everlasting symbol of mystery. Their financial system did not vanish in the smoke of Jacques de Molay's pyre. It was simply adopted. The revolutionary banking methods the Templars perfected, the very tools that made them indispensable, were far too valuable to be discarded with their name. The void they left was a vacuum that demanded to be filled, and it was the shrewd merchant families of Italy who stepped in. The Medicis of Florence and the other great banking houses saw the blueprint the Templars had created and refined it for a new commercial age. They took the Templar letter of credit and transformed it into more sophisticated bills of exchange. They expanded the system of secure deposits and withdrawals, creating the earliest recognizable checking accounts for a burgeoning merchant class. The Templars had invented the engine of international finance, and the Italians simply built a sleeker, more commercially focused chassis around it. This was not a new invention, it was a legacy inherited and improved. The warrior monks had proven that trust could be a currency more powerful than gold, and that lesson was not forgotten. It was merely secularized, its roots in holy pilgrimage slowly overshadowed by the demands of global trade. The fortress-like preceptory was replaced by the counting house, but the fundamental principle remained identical. You could deposit value in one city and withdraw it in another, with the full faith and credit of an institution standing behind that promise. This was the Templars' most profound and unshakable contribution. They built the first reliable bridge across the treacherous landscape of medieval economics, a bridge we all still walk today. Every time you use a credit card or transfer money across borders, you are participating in a system of trust these monks helped codify. Their castles may have crumbled, but their financial architecture became the invisible foundation of our modern world. So what became of the brothers who survived the purge, and where did their scattered members find refuge? Their stone legacy still towers over the landscapes they once ruled. While their financial system was absorbed into the modern world, their architectural genius was left carved into the earth itself, a permanent record of their power and piety. Their castles were not just fortresses, they were integrated command centers, masterpieces of form meeting function. Take Chateau Pellerin, also known as Atlet, their great stronghold on the coast of the Holy Land. It was built with its back to the sea, featuring a protected harbor for their ships and two massive, concentric walls that made a direct assault virtually impossible. The knights themselves, using their own labor and that of hired craftsmen, hauled the stone from a nearby quarry and completed this colossal project in just a few years. This was more than a military base, it was a statement of permanent, unshakable authority. Inside those walls, the complex hummed with activity. There were barracks for the knights and sergeants, stables for their war horses, storage for the grain and treasure that funded their operations, and a church for their daily prayers. Every aspect of life, from the spiritual to the logistical, was contained within that impregnable shell. This architectural philosophy extended far beyond the battlefields of the Levant. Across Europe, the Templars constructed a network of preceptories and commanderies that served as the local nodes of their international empire. These were often fortified compounds, combining a residence for the brothers, a chapel for worship, and most importantly, a secure treasury. The round church, a design they favored, is one of their most distinctive contributions. The Temple Church in London, consecrated in the year 1185, is a perfect example. Its circular nave was meant to symbolize the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, creating a physical echo of that holiest of sites right in the heart of a European capital. Walking into that space was meant to be a pilgrimage in miniature, a spiritual journey for those who could not travel to the Holy Land. But these beautiful churches were also intensely practical. Their thick, windowless lower levels often served as the local bank vault, a secure place to hold the deposits and documents that fueled their financial engine. Worship and wealth management happened literally under the same roof. How do we connect with this vanished world today? The answer is written in stone, waiting for us to walk among its echoes. The fires of suppression could not burn away the institutional blueprint the Templars had perfected. While the name was erased, the essential formula of a religious military order, with its fusion of faith, finance, and force, was far too practical to vanish. In Portugal, the king executed a masterstroke of political pragmatism. Instead of destroying the Templars within his borders, he simply gave them a new name. With the Pope's quiet approval, the Order of Christ was founded in 1319, and it was not a new creation. It was the old order reborn. The same knights moved into the same commanderies, managing the same vast estates, now under a different insignia. This seamless transition meant the Templars' operational knowledge, their naval experience, and their financial infrastructure remained perfectly intact, a dormant engine waiting for a visionary to restart it. That visionary was Prince Henry the Navigator, who would later become the Grand Master of the Order of Christ. Under his leadership, the Order's immense resources were funneled into a new kind of crusade, not to reclaim Jerusalem by land, but to outflank the Islamic world by sea and find the mythical Christian kingdom of Prester John. The caravels that slipped from Portuguese harbors into the terrifying unknown of the Atlantic did not sail under the king's banner alone. Their great, billowing sails were emblazoned with the stark, crimson cross of the Order of Christ, the same potent symbol once borne by the Templars. This was no coincidence, it was a direct lineage. The wealth that funded Vasco da Gama's journey to India and the ships that carried Cabral to Brazil were, in a very real sense, powered by the Templar fortune and their enduring spirit of expansion. Across the border in Spain, a similar absorption took place. The Templars' sprawling assets and many of their members were distributed among the existing Iberian military orders, chiefly the orders of Calatrava, Santiago, and Alcantara. These knights already fought the long Reconquista to drive Moorish powers from the peninsula. The infusion of Templar property, revenue, and battle-hardened veterans provided a massive boost to their capabilities, accelerating the Christian push southward. The message from Europe's monarchs was clear. They condemned the Templar name as heretical while eagerly embracing everything the Templars had built. The brand was toxic, but the functions were indispensable. This quiet continuity raises a profound question. If the Order's core activities were so valued that they had to be preserved under new names, what does that say about the validity of the charges used to destroy them? The successor orders were not just imitators, they were the direct heirs, carrying the torch of a legacy too powerful to be extinguished by a single king's greed. Even as their physical order was dismantled, the legend of the Templars was just beginning its long, strange afterlife. The great Italian poet Dante Alighieri, a contemporary of their downfall, immortalized their tragedy in his Divine Comedy. He placed Pope Clement V in the eighth circle of hell for his betrayal, a powerful and early artistic condemnation that framed the Templars not as heretics, but as martyrs to political greed. This set a powerful precedent. For centuries, the knights became potent symbols in the cultural imagination. The romantic novelist Sir Walter Scott cast them as mysterious, often ominous figures in stories like Ivanhoe, shaping the popular image of the Templar as a brooding, wealthy outcast. Operas and plays picked up the theme, weaving tales of their lost grandeur and hidden powers. But the 20th and 21st centuries witnessed an explosion of Templar mania, where their story was repurposed for a modern appetite for conspiracy. Umberto Eco's novel Foucault's Pendulum is a brilliant satire of this very phenomenon. It shows how easily historical fragments can be woven into an all-encompassing and entirely fictional secret history. The book serves as a warning about the human desire to find patterns where none exist. Yet it was Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code that launched the Templars into the stratosphere of pop culture. Brown's blockbuster fused the Knights with the mythical priory of Sion, painting a picture of a millennia-long conspiracy to protect the bloodline of Christ. In these stories, the Templars are no longer just bankers or soldiers. They are the guardians of the Holy Grail, the holders of earth-shattering secrets about the very nature of Christianity. This modern myth-making is compelling, but it comes at a cost. The historical Templars, with their very real and complex story of faith, finance, and political betrayal, are often buried beneath layers of sensational fiction. They have been transformed from a medieval religious order into a universal archetype, the ultimate secret society. So why does this specific group, above all others, hold such a powerful grip on our imagination? Perhaps it is because their true story contains all the elements of a perfect narrative, a rise and fall so dramatic that we feel the truth alone cannot be enough. We are driven to believe they must have left something more behind, a secret that is still waiting to be found. The embers of their historical order had long grown cold, but the symbol of the red cross on a white field refused to die. Centuries after the last Templar passed from living memory, a new fascination began to stir in the drawing rooms and libraries of 18th century Europe. This was the age of enlightenment, yet it fostered a powerful, romantic countercurrent, a deep nostalgia for the age of chivalry and crusade. Intellectuals and aristocrats, captivated by tales of honor and sacred quests, sought to resurrect the ideals they believed the Templars embodied. Out of this romantic longing, a new phenomenon was born, the Neo-Templar order. The most prominent of these modern revivals is the sovereign military order of the Temple of Jerusalem, often known by its French initials, OSMTJ. Established in the early 1800s, this organization, and others like it, make a crucial distinction. They claim a spiritual succession from the medieval knights, a continuity of purpose and chivalric values, but they do not assert an unbroken organizational line back to Jacques de Molay. The historical chain was definitively shattered in the 14th century, a fact these modern groups openly acknowledge. So what is the mission of a 21st century Templar? The focus has shifted entirely from the battlefield to the community. These are fraternal and charitable organizations. Their work involves raising funds for hospitals, supporting local food banks, and sponsoring educational initiatives. They study the code of chivalry not as a military manual, but as a guide for ethical living in the modern world. You will not find them guarding pilgrim roads or managing international letters of credit. The sword has been symbolically set aside in favor of the charitable deed. This enduring revival tells us something profound not about the past but about ourselves. It reveals a timeless human attraction to the powerful trinity of ideals the Templars came to represent: knighthood, brotherhood, and selfless service. We are drawn to the image of the warrior monk, a figure who combines spiritual devotion with disciplined action. The modern Templar keeps the name and the symbolism alive, not by reenacting history, but by channeling its most noble aspirations into acts of contemporary goodwill. The gritty, complex reality of the original order is replaced by a purified legend, one that continues to inspire people to strive for something greater than themselves. This legacy of inspiration, it turns out, may be their most valuable treasure of all. So were they truly guilty of the monstrous crimes that sealed their fate? The verdict of modern history delivers a resounding and fascinating acquittal. The overwhelming consensus among scholars today is that the Knights Templar were innocent of the core, sensational charges. The idea of a vast, organized heresy, with knights systematically spitting on the cross and worshipping a demonic idol, is now seen for what it always was: a fiction crafted in the torture chambers of France. Those confessions, so meticulously recorded, hold no water because they were extracted through the systematic breaking of human bodies and wills. There exists not a single piece of credible, verifiable evidence from outside the torture process to support the claims of idolatry or enforced sacrilege. This was a classic show trial, a politically motivated sham where the verdict was decided long before the first witness was ever seized. Yet, to understand how such a lie could gain traction, we must look for a single grain of truth. It is possible that some of the order's secretive initiation rituals, conducted behind closed doors, were intentionally harsh or confusing. A ceremony might have involved a candidate being told to deny Christ 3 times to test his resolve, a practice that could be wildly misinterpreted or deliberately twisted by an accuser. This tiny, distorted kernel was all King Philip's ministers needed. They took a potential rite of passage and magnified it into a proof of satanic conspiracy. If the Templars were not guilty of heresy, then what was their true transgression? Their real crimes were arrogance, profound secrecy, and the sheer scale of the wealth and power they had accumulated. They operated as a state within a state, accountable to no earthly king, and that kind of autonomy breeds fear and resentment in those who hold temporal power. The trial was not about sin, it was about sovereignty. It was about a king deciding it was safer to destroy his most powerful creditor than to remain in their debt. The Templars' fatal flaw was not a loss of faith, but their very success. They became so indispensable, so deeply woven into the fabric of royal finance and international politics, that they represented a threat simply by existing. This is the timeless, chilling lesson their story imparts. To become utterly essential to a powerful patron is to paint a target on your back, for the day will inevitably come when that patron decides that owning you is less convenient than simply taking everything you have. Their ultimate legacy is a masterclass in the anatomy of power. The Knights Templar built an organization so advanced it would be studied by business strategists centuries later. At their peak, they achieved what modern corporations call vertical integration. They controlled every single step of their operational chain. They owned the farms that grew their food, the mills that ground their grain, and the ships that transported it. They managed the treasury that held the capital and fielded the army that protected the entire enterprise. This was not a loose affiliation of different businesses. It was a single, unified machine, an entirely self-sufficient economy operating across continents. Their success was rooted in a potent combination of factors. They had a mission so clear and compelling it inspired men to dedicate their entire lives to its cause. They possessed an autonomy that freed them from local taxes, laws, and oversight, allowing for swift, centralized decision-making. And they fostered a culture of relentless innovation, inventing financial instruments that were centuries ahead of their time. This was the engine of their incredible rise. But that very engine contained the seeds of their catastrophic fall. The same qualities that made them formidable also made them a target. Their immense wealth and secrecy bred deep-seated envy and suspicion in the royal courts of Europe. Their financial indispensability created a dangerous dependency. The King of France did not just owe them money. His entire government relied on their banking infrastructure to function. This kind of dependency can fester into a deep and dangerous resentment. The most powerful entity in a system often becomes the focal point for every grievance and the scapegoat for every failure. Their greatest vulnerability was their centralized structure. By concentrating so much power and wealth into a single, identifiable institution, they created a prize so tempting it was irresistible to a predator. A king could not easily attack a decentralized network of independent merchants, but he could target one grand master and one central treasury. their failure was not in their operations but in their diplomacy. They neglected the delicate art of managing political relationships, especially with the one man who was both their biggest client and their most powerful potential adversary. They assumed their papal protection and financial utility were shields enough. They were wrong. No amount of gold can protect you from a sovereign who decides that your existence is a threat to his own. This is the timeless, chilling lesson of the Templars. It is a cautionary tale for any institution that amasses great influence, whether a corporation, a bank, or a government agency. Absolute power, when concentrated and unaccountable, does not corrupt the holder alone. It also paints a target on their back, inviting the very forces that will inevitably seek to tear them down. That blank canvas is precisely why their conspiracy industry thrives. We are not drawn to their story because it is simple, but because it is complex enough to hold our deepest anxieties and wildest hopes. The human mind craves order. We instinctively look for patterns in the chaos of history, believing that major events must be caused by equally major, hidden forces. The idea that the Templars were destroyed over something as mundane as royal debt feels strangely unsatisfying. It is far more compelling to believe their downfall was the result of a secret so powerful it threatened the foundations of Christianity itself, a truth so explosive it had to be erased. Their genuine operational secrecy, the kind needed to protect financial transactions and military plans, creates the perfect fertile ground for these myths to grow. If they were hiding their banking codes and troop movements, what else were they hiding? The absence of a single, vast treasure hoard only fuels the legend. For believers, the lack of evidence is not proof of absence. It is the ultimate proof of a cover-up so complete that only the most dedicated can uncover its traces. This is a self-sealing argument. Any gap in the historical record, any unanswered question, becomes not a mystery to be solved by historians, but a deliberate void left by conspirators, a space waiting to be filled by a grander narrative. The Holy Grail is the perfect symbol for this. It represents pure, unattainable knowledge, a relic of divine power that transcends the grubby realities of taxes and loans. By casting the Templars as its guardians, we elevate their story from a political assassination to a cosmic struggle between light and darkness. We are not just telling a story about medieval bankers. We are telling a story about the nature of truth itself and our own longing to believe that the most important secrets are still out there, waiting to be found. The suppression of the Templars cracked the very foundation of papal authority. Pope Clement V, the Vicar of Christ on earth, had proven powerless to shield his own most powerful military order from the ambition of a single king. This was not merely a political defeat, it was a symbolic earthquake that resonated through every court and cathedral in Europe. For centuries, the Pope in Rome had been the ultimate arbiter, a spiritual sovereign whose decrees could make emperors kneel. But when King Philip IV of France arrested the Templars and Clement could only issue feeble protests before ultimately sanctioning the persecution, the world saw a profound truth. The universal authority of the papacy was buckling under the rising weight of the nation-state. This shift was made terrifyingly concrete just a few years later. Under continued French pressure, the papal court was moved from Rome to the city of Avignon on the French border. For nearly 70 years, a succession of popes would reside there, a period often called the Babylonian captivity of the Church. To the rest of Christendom, it appeared the throne of St. Peter was now a political satellite of the French crown. The independent moral voice of the Church, its claim to stand above petty earthly politics, was severely compromised by its complicity in the Templar affair. How could it condemn the sins of kings when it had helped one destroy an innocent order to settle a debt? This erosion of spiritual credibility planted deep seeds of discontent. The notion of a single, united Christendom under the firm leadership of the Pope began to fracture. The brutal pragmatism that crushed the Templars revealed a church that was all too human, all too political. It set a precedent that would echo 2 centuries later, when reformers like Martin Luther would point to such corruption and ask whether the entire institution had lost its way. The Templars were more than just victims of a greedy king. They were the first major casualty in a slow, centuries-long transfer of power from the altar to the throne, from a united spiritual empire to the competing secular kingdoms that would define the modern world. While documents tell the story, the silent stones tell their own truth. Archaeology reaches across the centuries to find the tangible remains of the Templar world, offering a physical rebuttal to the lies that destroyed them. Excavations at key sites reveal the blueprint of their daily reality. At the Paris Temple, the very heart of their financial empire, foundations speak of a formidable fortified complex, its layout designed for security and efficiency, not secret rituals. In Toma, Portugal, their magnificent headquarters stands as a monument to their lasting power, a sprawling convent and castle that later became the nerve center for the Order of Christ. Across Europe, from rural England to the French countryside, digs at local preceptories consistently uncover the same pattern, a pragmatic and organized community living and working within a defined compound. These were not the lavish palaces of decadent heretics, but functional, often austere, command centers. The most telling architectural signature is the round church, a design they favored for its symbolic echo of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Uncovering the foundations of these structures provides undeniable physical proof of a unified, devout identity stretching from London to the Levant. The artifacts pulled from the earth are equally mundane and revealing. Shards of simple pottery, animal bones from their meals, and the remnants of their blacksmith forges paint a picture of a self-sufficient brotherhood. There are no hidden caches of idolatrous statues, no chambers filled with evidence of blasphemy. Instead, we find the quiet debris of disciplined daily life. Modern science is now adding new depth to this investigation. Forensic archaeology proposes studying the skeletal remains buried at sites like the Temple Church in London. By analyzing bones and teeth, researchers could learn about the knights' health, their diet, and even trace their geographical origins through isotope analysis. Was a knight buried in England actually born in France? Did their bones show the marks of a lifetime of combat and hard travel? Each fragment of evidence, from a piece of pottery to a femur, acts as a tiny brushstroke, slowly painting over the lurid caricature created by their persecutors. This patient work peels back the sensational layers of myth to reveal a more grounded, human understanding of who the Templars really were. A community of faithful men who built in stone a legacy far more enduring than the lies of a king. The saga of the Knights Templar is a profound human drama of faith, ambition, and betrayal that transcends its medieval setting. We have journeyed from their birth as humble protectors to their zenith as history's first multinational conglomerate, and finally to their shocking demise at the hands of a desperate king. Their legacy is a complex tapestry. They left us the foundations of modern finance, a collection of awe-inspiring ruins, and an endless wellspring of myth and mystery. Their story serves as an eternal reminder of how quickly fortune's wheel can turn, how power can attract destruction, and how the pursuit of wealth can corrupt the purest of missions. As the ashes of Jacques de Molay cooled, the legend of the Templars was only just beginning to burn. If this exploration of power, wealth, and legacy has captivated you, share your thoughts on what you find most compelling about their story in the comments below. and subscribe for more deep dives into the shadows of history.